Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. So I think we have one new participant today who's not been here before. So for your benefit and for the recording, my name is Mike Warden, and along with my colleague Catherine Carpenter, we have been appointed by the Secretary of State to conduct the examination of the Telford and Wrekin local plan. And today we'll be dealing with Matter 6, Issue 2, which Ms Carpenter will lead on. Before I start, can I just go through just a number of procedures? The evacuation procedure, if there is a fire alarm, and none are planned, but if there's a fire alarm, it's through that door there, that grey door there, and downstairs to the courtyard outside. Toilets are through that door there, and refreshments, teas and coffees are available through the course of the sessions over there. Just a word about the microphones. The microphones are for the recording, not for amplification. Given the number of people, I don't think there's going to be a problem, but just remember that if you can just make sure you can speak up when you speak, because then your voice is not being amplified. And please switch your microphone on and off when you finish. There is a colleague, we have a colleague from PINS here today observing, so if you see us talking to him, then that's who it is. Can I start by asking Mr Humphreys if there's anything that he wishes to bring to our attention before we start on the matter?
There is not actually today, sir, for a change.
I suppose that's good news. Okay, thank you very much, Mr Humphreys. Thank you, Ms Carpenter.
Thank you. Also, just to add that if you want to speak, if you could put your nameplate on end, and I'll bring you in when appropriate. Thanks. So, yes, Matter 6, Issue 2, which is the Economy and Centres chapter of the plan, Development Management Policies. Various questions, as you'll have seen from the MIQs. My plan is to slightly change the order. So I'm going to start with the town centre issues and then come back to the other stuff. I'm therefore going to start from question 79, if people are happy with that, and work through to the end, question 88, and then go back to the beginning and deal with the others. Any concerns with that at all?
No, you've got the same team from our side for the whole day, so that's absolutely fine.
Is everyone happy with that on this side? Yeah, okay. Fine, thank you. So, starting with question 79, which is a question about the Telford Town Centre boundary. And this is a point that the Telford trustees have raised. Can I just turn to the council first and ask the council to clarify, so in relation to the question as is expressed there, clarify, have there been any changes to the boundary of the town, so to Telford Town Centre boundary, from the adopted position? And if you could briefly summarise the justification for including the areas in question within the boundary.
Sorry, thank you, ma'am. Just in terms of the boundary of the town centre, I think what we've done is we've removed the overlap of the Central Telford SEA with the town centre, and that just helps clarify the position around unintended consequences of B2, B8 within the actual town centre boundary itself.
But in terms of the areas in question, so in particular the land to the north of the A5 and also the town park south of the primary shopping area, which are the areas that have been queried in terms of why they're included. So my question was, has that changed from the current adopted position?
I'm just bringing up the plan just at the minute. I think the Wi-Fi is just slightly slow, and I'll just clarify the position there. I can confirm that the boundary in the adopted map is the same as the boundary in the plan that the publication version of the plan.
Thanks. And so therefore, could you just briefly summarise the rationale, which will have been the rationale presumably at the time that the current adopted plan was adopted, for those areas being included within the town centre boundary?
Yeah, so the train station is a major transport hub for the town centre, and the council's improved the connectivity between the train station and the town centre. So if you come by train, you would have walked across the Swallow Bridge that we put in. It was a £10 million investment to improve that linkage. I think a train station forms a really key part of that kind of town centre approach, and improving the connectivity and the kind of that entry point for the town centre really helps encourage sustainable travel, helps encourage those uses, and helps the broader town centre approach, and in particular kind of shopping centre. So we want people to come by train, but we want them to shop in Telford, visit Telford, etc. The area of the town park, so that adjoins the Southwater area that we're kind of in at the minute. The uses within that area are complementary to the overall town centre, especially the leisure retail uses within the shopping centre itself and the broader area there. So again, it's about that mix of uses within that centre that encourages footfall, encourages people to come and visit, play, work within the town centre. So we feel that that's an appropriate boundary for the town centre with those kind of mixes in mind.
Thank you. If I could turn to, is it Mr. Benham from the Telford Trustees? Yeah. So these were points, I think, that you had raised. I mean, now that you've heard the council's explanation, does that reassure you at all in terms of the extent of the boundary there?
Well, not really, no. I suppose our position on that is that the town centre boundary is sort of seems bloated to us and is extending much further than it needs to be. There's reference in, I think it's council's response to the MIQs, that the area north of the A5, which has the mixed use allocation in it, sort of suggests that is part of the town centre because it has the allocation in there, and they talk about driving investment and development and so forth. But I think the allocation itself, fine, and that achieves the goals that they are setting out without it needing to be in the town centre. And for us, the town centre, that area there in particular, feels very divorced from the real town centre, quite literally divorced by the highways infrastructure, and the only pedestrian way through is over the link over the road, and it just feels like it doesn't need to go quite that far. And then that boundary continues around and includes all sorts of land which doesn't have the characteristics of a town centre. It doesn't reflect the definition of a town centre within the NPPF, and to us it just feels like it's grown too far. Similarly for the town park, that feels like an unnecessary inclusion within it. The uses that are within it, they are leisure uses. We wouldn't dispute that, but you could find those leisure uses in a family play farm, for example. It doesn't make that a town centre use necessarily. So the park doesn't feel like it needs to be part of the town centre.
Okay. What is the concern of the Telford Trustees in terms of like, what I suppose, where does the harm arise from that town centre boundary in terms of your client or from the Telford Trustees?
Well, simply it relates to edge and out of centre development. By having the town centre boundary as wide as it is, then depending on the sort of development that is coming forward, then I suppose by definition you could have edge and out of centre development of different types, with different tests for retail and offices and so on, as you know, but it just extends that distance where someone may come forward saying, well, this is technically an out or edge of town centre site, and it just extends that further and further away from where it needs to be or should be rather.
Given that you've heard, or we've been told that there has been no change in these particular areas in terms of the town centre boundary, that is the boundary that's currently in place. I mean, is there any evidence that's caused a problem to date?
Not to date. It's a point we made at the last local plan inquiry some years ago, so we just continue to make the same point. There is, well, has been quite a lot of out of centre retail development that's been going on in the last few years, albeit that is within the retail parks and so on, which is not related to that town centre boundary. So our concern is really protecting the primary shopping area, if I call it that, from out and edge of centre development. There's no evidence of those sorts of things that I've mentioned coming forward in the recent years, but you know, it's a point we made last time and we continue to make it, and we'd leave it for you to make a judgment on it.
Thank you. Anything the council would like to say in response?
Just give you a few quick policy references in the NPPF, if I may, Madam. So paragraph 90 of the framework deals with what planning policies should do in relation to town centres. Part A, define a network and hierarchy of town centres and promote their long-term vitality and viability by allowing them to grow and diversify in a way that can respond to rapid changes in the retail and leisure industries, allowing a suitable mix of uses and reflects their diverse characters. D, allocate a range of suitable sites in town centres to meet the scale and type of development likely to be needed, looking at least 10 years ahead, meeting anticipated needs for retail, leisure, office and other main town centre uses over this period. Should not be compromised by limited site availability, so town centre boundaries should be kept under review where necessary. We would say our approach of maintaining the existing town centres boundaries is entirely consistent with that approach. It's a classic case of planning judgment as to where these things lie, not something that fundamentally goes to soundness, and we're content with our position.
Thank you. So if we move on to question 80, and this is around, well, it was just, the question relates to a perceived inconsistency in terminology. The council, so between the primary shopping area, which is referred to in the policy, and the policy's map referring to the primary centre area, I think. And our question was around effectiveness, given that inconsistency. The council, I think you have offered to amend that on the policies map, is that right?
Yes, that is correct, yes.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, Mr. Benham, would that address your concern? Yeah, okay, thank you. And then part B of question 80 relates to the council's differentiation of a primary shopping area secondary frontage within the policy. And the justification for that, and indeed the consistency of that with national policy, has been questioned again by the Telford trustees. The council, in your statement, you've given some explanation for a justification there. Can I just ask you briefly to summarise that, just for the benefit of Mr. Benham? I'm sure Mr. Benham's probably read what you've said, but if you could just briefly summarise that, you know, from the council's point of view, what is the rationale and the justification for having a secondary frontage there?
Yeah, so it's the council's position that the role of the secondary frontage would be to facilitate sort of sui generis uses, but not lead to an over-proliferation within other areas of the town centre. So to keep those sort of in a confined area.
When you refer to sui generis uses, what sorts of uses have you got in mind?
So in the area currently, we see things like gyms, so retail and well, that would be leisure. And then I believe there's also betting shops in that area. Yeah.
And so is there any, I suppose, is there a mechanism within the policy, or how is the policy supposed to work in terms of, presumably from what I'm hearing, you're happy, the council is happy to support that sort of use in that particular area, presumably logically therefore less happy for them to occur elsewhere within the primary shopping area. Is that the rationale, and how would that work in practice?
Yeah, sorry, ma'am. I think in terms of principle, it's about protecting the quality of the retail provision, the leisure provision within the centre itself. But as part of that broader mix within the town centre area, providing scope for those uses to be there, if you like. In terms of the policy provisions, we've clearly set out, I think it's Hazeldine House, which is the kind of area that's a secondary frontage. So it allows for that, those uses to be allowed within the centre within that area, if you like.
Okay, thanks. And am I right that that secondary frontage area is an existing designation? Is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
And I suppose, what's the council's evidence that designation is currently working, is currently achieving what you want it to achieve?
I think if you went down there, you'd be able to see that there's activity, and you know the units are fulfilling the uses that they are intended for in terms of the mix of sui generis uses within that particular area.
And is it achieving a meaningful differentiation between that particular part of the primary shopping area and the rest of it, in terms of the mix of uses coming forward?
Yeah, so I would say it does, yes.
So, okay. So again, turning to Mr. Benham, because I think this was a point that has been raised by the Telford trustees. What's your response to what you've heard from the council?
Well, I suppose first and foremost, we're not in any way opposed to the uses that are there or will be there. We're not opposed to having retail, leisure, and sui generis uses there. So we accept all of that. I suppose it is largely a question of consistency with what the MPPF talks about. There is no reference anymore to secondary shopping frontages. Secondary shopping frontages. I think in our mind, when we read EC 6.3, and then you look at parts A and B, the difference between A and B is really the reference to the sui generis uses. So I suppose we just question why we really need Part B. That could be absorbed into Part A, so supporting retail and complementary leisure uses and sui generis uses within the primary shopping area, full stop. They would all, it would need planning permission to get a use like that into that location. The relevant tests around, which are set out within the policy more generally around ensuring that uses positively contribute to vitality and mix of uses, viability of the town centre, that can all still be achieved under Part A of that policy. It's just a question we don't feel we really need to have an area specifically designated as the secondary frontage. If they are good quality town centre uses which fulfil the role of maintaining a vital and viable town centre, then there shouldn't be an issue in having them in the primary shopping area at all.
Thank you. And given that, again, that designation already exists, is there evidence that it's causing a problem from the Telford trustees' point of view?
No problem. As I say, it's more about just simplifying policies and making them more consistent in our mind with the NPPF. The area functions relatively well, but it just sort of adds a layer of complexity we don't think needs to be there.
Can I go back to the council?
Yes, just a couple of points. So, right to observe that the NPPF itself doesn't retain the concept of primary and secondary retail frontages, but you do have that in the PPG, and so it's a recognised there that is a tool available to local authorities for use in town centres, and so the maintenance of that type of policy is entirely consistent with national guidance. And as you've heard, it's a policy approach that has been rolled forward from the previous plan. There's no evidence to suggest that it's been problematic in any way, and there is a difference between A and B in that there is additional wording, and in essence what the focus is ensuring that what happens in the secondary frontages supports what's happening in the primary frontages, and so gives that degree of control to the council about what's taking place there. So we're content that it's a sound policy as drafted.
Thank you. Okay, so that brings us on to question 81, which was around the reference in policy EC6 to high-tech uses, the justification for that and clarity around it. Again, the council, you've given an explanation. I mean, can I just ask, Mr. Benham, have you had an opportunity to look at the explanation that the council has given, or I'm minded not to ask them to kind of summarise it if you've already looked at it? If that's the case, and you've had a chance to look at it, what's your response to what they've said?
Yeah, I've read the council's response. Understand what they're saying. And largely agree with it now. So we don't have anything further to add to that.
Okay, so you're happy with that? Okay. And can I just check with the council? Were you actually proposing to modify anything there at all?
No, not with regard to high tech. I don't think we've proposed any modifications in the MIQ or in the CD08 document.
Thank you. And along similar lines, question 82, Telford trustees had queried the meaning of the term existing gateways. Council, you have clarified that. Mr. Benham, does that clarification assist you?
Yes, it does. Yeah, we don't have any further comments on that point either.
I mean,
sorry. Just going back to the previous point. I think the clarification they've given in the response is helpful. Right? Some amendment, perhaps to the subtext, to just make the point that they have made, that they're of. That it's not the PSA where they were expecting to direct these sorts of uses. That would be helpful, and we would welcome that.
Right. Okay. I mean, funnily enough, so I was going to ask a similar question in relation to the gateway. So, i.e., clarification given by the council in your statement. Would it help the effectiveness of the plan to include some of that explanation within supporting text for the benefit of plan users? The question relates to both.
That's fine. We can go away and think of some wording for that. That's no problem.
Fantastic. So that would be in relation to high tech and gateways. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is a supporting text point
Exactly.
rather than a policy point, and
Yep.
so whether it ends up being considered as a main model or just a suggested
Yep.
modification. But
Yep.
we'll look at some wording.
Yep, thank you. Question 83, I had no further questions unless anyone else does. Nope. So move on from question 83. So question 84, again, similar situation in that we had raised some questions about the meaning of the term. So here it's the reference to multi-generational town centre living, and then the justification for that requirement in higher density town centre development. Council, I think you have proposed a modification here, is that right? And could you just explain what you have in mind?
Yes, so we've proposed a modification to Part 4, and that would read, Part 4B would be, the mix and type of units are appropriate to multi-generational town centre living, comma, and this would be the additional text, demonstrating unit mix proposed is required for the development to be viably delivered.
Okay. So again, turning to Mr. Benham, because I think again this was a point you had raised. What's your view on what the council has proposed?
Yeah, we've seen what they've said, and I mean, it provides the clarity we were looking for, so we don't have anything further to add on this point.
Okay, happy. Did anyone else have anything on this point? No. Anything from the council? No? Okay, all right. So again, I think include that one in the list of... Right, that brings us to policy EC9, out of centre and edge of centre development. So... just before I come to that, it's my understanding from looking at CD7, so the list of suggested modifications, that no changes or no suggested amendments are made in relation to EC7 or EC8. And we had no questions about those policies. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So that brings us to EC9. Okay. So, right, what I propose to do is I'm going to take questions 85 and 86 sort of together. And in this case, I'm just going to turn to Mr. Benham first. Again, I think it was primarily yourselves, the Telford trustees, that had some concerns in relation to this policy. Now, from your statement, so the council has proposed a modification, which is around clarifying the position in relation to amalgamation, subdivisions, mezzanine floors, amendments to existing conditions. Council's nodding. Just on that, Mr. Benham, which was one of the points you'd raised, I know there are others, but just sticking with that one for now, is that modification, if you've had a chance to see it, if not, just say so and I can get the council to read it out, but if you've had a chance to see it, does that satisfy that particular point that you'd raised?
I have seen it. I'm just trying to find it in my documents here. The short answer is it doesn't quite answer the question that we were asking. I'm just trying to find the document though. So, try and get this in the right order. So, I suppose we would welcome the the greater, well, the rephrasing of the policy, particularly Part A, where it reads the proposal provides a floor space greater than 500 square metres.
Actually, sorry, Mr. Madam, let me stop you there. I was just for now, just because there are several things going on here, just in terms of the modification that the council has made in relation to amalgamation, subdivisions, mezzanine floors, etc. It's the one that it was actually originally listed in CD07. I've put a reference down here of MOD 83. Can I ask the council just to, if you could just sort of read out or explain that particular modification that you're proposing, and I'll come back to the other points, if that's all right. Thanks.
Yes, so that proposed modification is in EC9, Part 2, and it would be in addition to point A, and this would read as follows. The proposal provides a floor space greater than 500 square metres gross and is located within 500 metres of the boundary of Telford Town Centre, and then the modification would go as follows, including through amalgamation, subdivision, creation of mezzanine floors, and amendments to existing planning conditions. And that would be the end of the modification. We would go on to point B.
Okay. All right, apologies. Maybe I got that wrong. Let me just check one thing. Just give me a minute. Right, yes, okay, yes. So the proposal is to add that wording to the end of Part 2A. So, setting aside the thresholds and so on for a minute, which we'll come back to, just in relation to that proposed addition, Mr. Benham, on that point that you'd raised, is that helpful to you?
Sorry, the council's response to MIQs, that now reads with, so it puts that phrasing, this requirement applies to proposals for floor space, etc. Proposes to put that after Part C of that policy, as opposed to the policy, which I think is what, sorry, I can't read your name, but the gentleman over there just read. So I'm now confused which is being put forward, the policy wording or the wording that's in the...
Okay, I take your point. Yes. Yes, okay, so... yes, because I do want to just stay off the question of thresholds and distances for a minute. So I take your point that in fact, if we look at correctly the council's statement, which of course is more up to date than that document. I mean, it's the same wording, I think, but you're absolutely right. It's expressed in a slightly different way. Is that right, Captain?
Yes, sorry, that's my mistake. I've been on the wrong modification for that one. But yes, the proposed wording stays the same, but the above has changed.
Yeah. Okay. So, sticking with my strategy of trying to keep this separate, can I just again turn to Mr. Benham and just, if we just park the bits above for now, and if now all looking at the same document, so looking at that, what's in the council's matter statement, that insertion there in relation to amalgamation, subdivisions, etc., does that element address the concern you had raised in that regard?
Yes, the insertion of that wording is helpful, and we would agree with that.
Okay, that's great, thanks. So right, to park that bit. Okay, I am mindful, having looked at your statement, that it's my understanding that there were nevertheless some outstanding concerns in relation to various of the points you'd raised around this policy. So actually, I think what would be helpful is, could I ask you to briefly summarise what your outstanding concerns are in relation to the other aspects? Thank you.
Yeah, so the main point we're trying to get across is not the threshold itself. We're not, obviously, as the trustees that look after the primary shopping area, we would have that threshold as low as we possibly could. But 500 square metres in relation to Telford Town Centre, the primary shopping area, that has been rolled forward, I think, from the previous plan and previous evidence. We don't have an issue with that. Our concern is around the phrasing of that policy as a whole, and we're not particularly interested in the district or other centres. We're obviously only concerned with Telford itself. Is the language around, and there's a distinction between town centre boundaries, the primary shopping area boundary, retail having a different definition of edge out of centre, different distance compared to other town centre uses, e.g. offices. We are requesting that this policy more accurately reflects national policy. Obviously, an applicant can go and read national policy, but we think it would be more clear and more powerful for the policy to make all of those relevant distinctions within the policy itself, or the subtext, but ideally the policy.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, turning to the council, there does appear, to me at least, so yeah, firstly I note that obviously the council has proposed a modification in relation to these bits of the policy, so beyond what was in CDO 7, so that's what we were looking at earlier, so it's the other bits. There does appear, it would seem, to be an inconsistency between, even in that proposed modified wording, between, so again, Mr. Benham's concern, as I understand it, is less to do with the thresholds as to do with the expression of distances from boundaries. There does appear to be an inconsistency with the definition of edge of centre that's in the glossary of the MPPF. Can I ask the council to sort of explain its position on that? Is that an intentional inconsistency, and if so, what and where is the justification for it?
Thank you, ma'am. Effectively, the answer is it's rolled forward from the current adopted local plan in terms of the thresholds. That's kind of where we got to in terms of the policy wording there.
So the thresholds, yes, but in terms of the distances as well.
Yes, distances as well.
But coming back to, I mean, whether or not, or you know, whatever the position was in terms of the adopted plan, and obviously we're looking at this plan and looking at its consistency with the framework. So I suppose my point is that there nevertheless does appear to be an inconsistency in terms of the way that the distances from town centre boundaries and indeed the boundaries themselves, in the sort of terms expressed by Mr. Benham, there does appear to be an inconsistency there with the definition of edge of centre. So specifically, that definition at the back of the MPPF says for all other main town centre uses a location within 300 metres of a town centre boundary, which is not, I think, what either the policy says or indeed what your proposed modification says.
Yes, that is correct. There is a difference there. That is what national policy says in terms of its definition of an edge of centre. As you've heard, the reason it is as it is simply because it is the rolled over approach from the previous plan. But acknowledge, yes, that does create an inconsistency with national policy as it now stands.
So my question is, where is the justification for that? I mean, you've pointed me to the justification in evidence, albeit quite old evidence from 2014 that I think underpinned the adopted plan, but nevertheless you've pointed me to some evidence that justifies, as far as I can see, the thresholds. What I was struggling to find was the justification for the deviation from national policy in terms of the of the distances from boundaries.
Yes, well, I think obviously the evidence is from the adopted local plan. I would say more broadly, in terms of Telford as the makeup of the area, it's not a traditional concentric town centre. So that kind of feeds into the distances a bit. But I think what we can do is go back and look at that inconsistency and have a look and see whether we need to propose a modification that would cover that off, if that's okay.
I think that would be helpful, please. I mean, unless you're able to point me, you know, to something a bit more specific than it's just in the adopted plan. I think that would be helpful. Mr. Benham, would that assist you?
Yeah, I'm very happy to work through something with the council just to get the terminology to a way that we can agree on it together. Yeah.
Okay. I'll leave that to yourselves. I mean, you know, the action is for the council to look at it, whether or not you want to do that in discussion with Mr. Benham. Yeah.
That's fine, thank you.
Can I just make one point in relation to the suggested modification in as it's set out in the hearing statement? It goes back to a point you made yesterday about how it should be described. There's underlining text, which actually isn't new wording. So if you relate paragraph 2 to the paragraph 2 in the publication plan, that's not setting out the changes. So when you have a look at that, just remember that to do it that way, strike out text, underline new text, so it's clear what changes are being suggested compared to the publication version. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So just sticking with the thresholds now for a minute. As I say, you have pointed me to the evidence that underpins that, which is historic, and you're saying is rolling forward. And I've also heard what Mr. Benham has said in that regard. But there has also been a representation from Lidl, who have argued that the national threshold of 2,500 square metres should be adopted for food retail development. And they're saying the primary impact tends to fall on existing edge of or out of centre facilities rather than retailers within town centres. Can I just ask for the council's view on that argument?
I think we go back to our evidence that we've got for the adopted local plan, and I don't think that's caused too many issues in terms of how we've applied that. Obviously, Lidl have an operating model that they like to stick to, and obviously their view fits in with that operating model in terms of the representations they've made.
Okay, thank you. I did note, just again sticking with this element of the policy, I did note that in the current adopted plan, there was quite a helpful explanation for plan users of the rationale and justification ultimately for those thresholds. I couldn't see that in this plan. Through the lens of sort of clarity and effectiveness, might there be some merit in including some supporting text just to explain to plan users where those thresholds come from and what they're there for?
Yeah, happy to review the approach in the adopted local plan and then relook at what we've proposed here and see if there's can be added for effectiveness.
Great, thank you. And Telford trustees, I think you had raised a point, and this is a point that has come up before in different contexts and will come up again a little bit later on in this session, around Class E uses. The point being around control mechanisms for Class E permissions, bearing in mind the range of uses that Class E now comprises, not all of which are main town centre uses, and how to deal with that in town centre locations and out of town centre locations. So we've talked before, haven't we, about potential mechanism being conditions, and I think there is a reference to that. In this particular case, we've got, so in EC 9, section 4, there is indeed a reference to that, which is helpful. I suppose however, it talks about the range of goods sold may be restricted, either through planning conditions or a legal agreement. Is that wording fully effective in achieving the point? Because that implies just in relation to retail, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think, yeah, because what it's intended to do is obviously control retail development, whereas actually, if you just can restrict the range of goods, that wouldn't then in any way disapply your Class E PD rights. So I think a tightening up of the wording there would be appropriate. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Telford trustees, in that regard, do you have anything to add?
Not in relation to this policy. That's an excellent point that was raised, which we hadn't spotted, so we'd welcome that.
Okay, all right. So you have no further comments on this policy?
Not on the policy wording. There's a question that we've raised around evidence. I think that's your next question, 87. So no.
Okay,
not
all right. Okay,
thank you.
thank you. Yes, so that brings us on to question 87, which is the question about monitoring of, well, evidence of and monitoring of town centre vitality and viability, whether that is sufficient for the policy to be effective. Now actually, sorry, I'm just going to backtrack slightly. I've just thought of something else which is linked to this. Yes, so actually there was one other point, which I think may have been a point from Telford trustees, and was something I wanted just to pursue. So section 3 of EC9, so before we get on to evidence around vitality and viability, which we'll come back to, but this is pertinent to that. Section 3, the second sentence of section 3, the point raised, and is a question from me as well, is whether as expressed, is that fully consistent with the framework? So this is around impact assessments and what is being assessed. So MPPF paragraphs 94 and 95, it's a two-pronged test. That second sentence of part 3 there appears to suggest that only one of the prongs would, so to speak, be considered. So my question is that consistent with national policy? Does that need to be looked at?
Sorry, so you querying whether part A of 94 is properly reflected
Correct.
in that policy?
Yep. Because obviously it's an and, isn't it? There's A and B.
Yes, yeah, I think that's something for us to look at.
Yep, yep. And whilst on that topic, I mean, this is perhaps a slightly minor point, but the plan talks about a retail impact assessment, would impact assessment be more fully consistent with national policy? Because, of course, it could apply to a leisure situation, could it?
We'll check that and consider whether anything...
as part of your general consideration of that tightening up. Okay, thank you. Right, so, back to, therefore, the question about... So then the next question is about how is that assessment going to work in practice, bearing in mind it relies upon there being evidence around town centre vitality and viability in the first place and its ongoing monitoring. And this is indeed a point that the Telford trustees have raised. Can I ask Mr Benham to sort of summarise your concerns here? And you've also, I think, offered some information and to assist the council, and that's something I have already asked the council to consider ahead of this session. So, over to you. Thanks.
Thank you. It's really a question of how retail or indeed leisure impact is assessed when an application is brought forward. There have been many instances over the last few years of out-of-centre retail being brought forward. We have objected on every occasion. There is no up-to-date evidence from the council, as far as we're aware, that establishes what the baseline is for Telford Town Centre, or indeed probably other town centres. So we are unclear how the council can objectively understand retail impact when these applications are brought forward, because seemingly the council needs to rely upon the evidence put forward by an applicant, which is respectfully always going to tell a particular story, isn't it? So we would encourage the council to have an up-to-date evidence base around retail and leisure needs, but specifically we would welcome having an up-to-date assessment of Telford Town Centre and a proper understanding of how it is trading now, so that it can understand what impacts may be had on it. That's it in a very brief term.
Thanks. And am I right that, well, it is the case, isn't it, that with your statement you've also put forward some initial evidence in that regard and an offer to the council to assist them with pulling together evidence?
Yeah, it's very sort of high level, if you like, and it only relates to the parts of the primary shopping area that are within the trustees' ownership management, so it isn't as all-encompassing as it could be, and you know, it's meant to assist the council and yourself, and we would be happy to work with them to come up with a council-led evidence base on that point.
Okay, thank you. So, turning to the council, and in particular having regard to, obviously the NPPF, but also planning practice guidance around indicators for monitoring town centre viability and vitality. What's the council's response to that point from the Telford trustees?
Yeah, I think we understand the point they're making, but in terms of, on an application by application basis, we want these things to be assessed properly. The question is then, what does that mean from a local plan perspective? Because you can't, through policy, require particular type of evidence base to be produced on a regular basis by the... I'm just struggling to think about how you would put that into a policy. Because it would be a sort of, the council separate to whatever is in the local plan obviously has a load of other responsibilities and produces the documents, the types of monitoring in relation to the whole sort of spectrum of planning works. And it's a question of, well, what could you put in the plan that does that, rather than just being content that the development management process works and the council properly scrutinises any applications that are made.
Yeah. So, well, I think the council has already proposed some monitoring indicators around this, haven't you? So in the monitoring framework, I mean, that is one way that the plan could assist in this regard, perhaps.
That would be a guide as to the type of things to look at when considering these issues. So what would be an indicator of vitality, viability?
Would it not also be a repository of information, because there would have to be an annual monitoring report against those indicators, which would therefore require the council to, as it were, stay on top of those indicators, assuming that framework is, you know, reasonable and proportionate. I mean, that is something that I think has already been suggested, is it not, in the monitoring framework that's been put to us?
Yes, I just was thinking about, can you go any further than that and put in something in a policy, which I'm not sure works, but in terms of, yes, the monitoring side of things, a framework of the nature we've proposed, I think is sort of sufficient to cover the point.
I mean, I suppose the Telford trustees' point is also around some sort of up-to-date baseline. I mean, I take your point that maybe that, yeah, it's somewhat harder to require that through a modification to the plan, but a monitoring framework would appear to be something that could assist. So if I turn to Mr. Benham, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the monitoring framework, and there is going to be obviously a separate session about that framework, but whether the sorts of things that have been suggested there would assist from your perspective, and if not, are there things that well, what's your response to that, I suppose? Yeah.
Well, I've not seen the monitoring framework, I have to admit.
It's on the examination website, so it's one of the council documents that came in.
TW12 is its reference.
Thank you. So it's which section of the library is it in?
Yeah, so it's in
council
the
documents.
Post-submission documents, council documents section.
Well, I can take a look at that. I think the point we're making, though, is that yeah, I accept that it's difficult to have this in policy, but the point is about a baseline from which to start your monitoring from. Otherwise, normally you would expect to see that baseline being the evidence forming part of the local plan, and then it monitored thereon. Whereas in this instance, we don't have a baseline. So there needs to be a creation of it, and that needs to be embedded somewhere, which may be in this monitoring framework. I don't know, I've not read it, but there needs to be a commitment to create the baseline and then monitor it going forward, we would say.
Okay, so I suppose turning to the council, the question is in part whether the policy can be fully effective upon adoption, well, absent a baseline, if indeed there isn't one. I mean, I suppose one question is what is the current position? What is the council's evidence in terms of vitality and viability of Telford Town Centre as things stand at present? If we start with that.
I think in terms of at present, we've historically collected vacancy rates from town district centres, which we've got an officer that deals with that. For Telford Town Centre, we've been in contact with the centre in recent years. When we requested the information, it wasn't always forthcoming. So I think happy to work with Chris in terms of moving forward with this. But it's a two-way street in terms of that information. Happy that obviously they've proposed or they've prepared something that we could look at in terms of a high-level baseline. I think in terms of the monitoring framework, we've got vacancy rates for market towns. We'd be happy to include additional monitoring in there for the town centre. So we've got within there looking at town centre uses, so monitoring that. But we'd be happy to include additional information within that monitoring framework to help meet the issue, if that's okay. That would help.
Okay, all right, thanks. Bearing in mind we have got the separate monitoring session, and Mr. Benham, you've said you would like to look at the monitoring framework. If there's anything you wanted to say in relation to that monitoring framework on this point, could you do that ahead of the session? So it's matter 7, issue 1. There's only one issue in matter 7, I think, which is the week after next. I think you're not due to attend, but if there was anything you wanted to say in that regard, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I can happily do that. Presumably a written submission would be
Please.
acceptable.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything further from the council?
No, we'll, and obviously if we receive something, we'll review that as well ourselves in advance
Yep.
of that.
Yep.
I think it's our very final session.
Yes, it is indeed the final session. So I suppose, yes, in terms of a sort of timeline to assist the council in having a chance to look at it, and indeed ourselves, if it was possible to get that in by the end of next week, would that be possible, Mr. Benham, if indeed there is anything you want to say?
Yeah, that's absolutely
End of
fine.
next week. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, that brings us, nothing else from anyone else, so that brings us on to policy EC11 and question 88. And just before I do that, just to double check with the council that there were no modifications proposed to EC10 as far as I could see, or nothing. We didn't have any questions in that regard, but
Yes, that's correct.
Okay,
We've
all right.
not proposed any modifications in there.
great, thank you. So therefore, EC11, we had one question, which was in relation to part 1G. So that says it requires proposals for shop front and advertisement design to be designed in accordance with an SPD. And this was a point that sort of briefly came up yesterday and probably will come up a couple more times. So the point here is that form of words, well, I'll phrase it as a question. Does that form of words elevate the SPD to the level of development plan policy? Is there another form of words that would help resolve that?
I think it is a recurring point that's made, in essence, wherever there's a reference along the lines of should comply with.
Yeah, exactly. So whether it's have regard to or something along those lines.
Yeah, we can look at whether or not by a sort of, I think it's a classic nuance of language, whether that avoids that concern about putting it on the same level as policy without having gone through the same process as it. And we'll look at that in a sort of, we'll do a sweep throughout the plan of such references and come up with.
That would actually be very helpful. I mean, there will be a couple of instances which, as we go through the third week, I probably will flag, but the sweep would also assist. Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Warden has just pointed out that there was another modification proposed to EC 11, the insertion of the word shutters. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And the rationale there was?
To help the policy be clear enough to be effective.
So an effectiveness point. Okay. Thank you. So that brings us to the end of the sort of town centres section. It is only just gone 10:30. However, I was going to propose a short break there before we move on back to the other bits. Would a 10-minute break be sufficient? If we reconvene at 1:45? Yep. Thank you. Okay, it's just gone 1:45. Is everyone back who needs to be back? Great. Okay, thank you. We'll resume. So I'm now going to go back to the beginning, as it were, so back to policy EC1 and question 68. In fact, well, yes, I guess I'm taking EC1 and EC2 together, so I'm going to run through those questions sort of together. But starting with question 68, which was a question about the boundaries for the strategic employment areas. So, of course, EC1 is employment development in the urban area and strategic employment areas. So the council has, helpfully in your statement, recognised that the list of strategic employment areas, I think in paragraph 8.6 of the plan, would need to be updated to be consistent with the changes to those strategic employment areas as listed in the updated topic paper TW3. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Right.
Yes.
So that will be a sort of supporting text update.
Yes, and I think there'll be a sweeping point here as well.
Indeed.
In relation to our discussion, in relation to the sustainable communities that we have.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Yes, thank you. That's helpful. And can I just check, is the is the policies map the version as published? So again, if we park the so-called submitted version, just focus on what we're examining, which is the published version. Can I just ask the council about consistency, therefore, between the boundaries on that version of the policies map for these SEAs and this updated list from the topic paper that would then be updated into the plan?
Thank you, Mum. I think it's a labelling point in terms of the SEA areas.
Yep.
Well, more than the boundary point.
Okay. Okay.
I think it's something worthwhile just us double checking.
Yeah, I think double checking. Yes.
It might be that they're okay. It might.
Yes.
I think it's a double check.
Yes. Yes. And again, in relation to that point around the interface with the sustainable communities as well, and obviously, as previously discussed, not having flexibility and so on. Yeah, thanks. And then, I mean, you mentioned the labelling point. I suppose I had a question around effectiveness of the plan, so clarity, effectiveness for plan users, was around, so got your list of your SEAs in the plan, you've got them designated on the policies map or denoted there, but how would a plan user know which one is which? Is what you're suggesting you'd add a name to each one, which might be helpful?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Any other comments in relation to question 68? No, okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay, so that brings us on to question 69, which brings us back to the question of Class E, which we keep coming back to. So, again, the question was around support for Class C uses within strategic employment areas, and this is something we have touched on before, I think, isn't it? And I think you have already clarified that it's not the council's intention that main town centre uses would be supported outside of town centre areas. Yeah, so that's helpful. And I think you have in your statement, you've obviously again talked about the conditions as a mechanism to manage that. You've made a suggestion, I think, around removing the word employment, or maybe if I could ask you, perhaps that's a better approach, if I could ask you just to quickly summarise what you are proposing in your statement in response to this, because you have made some suggested changes, I think. Yes, and obviously, if you, in so doing, if you could explain the rationale why.
Yes, so the council has proposed some changes to be added to the supporting text. Let me just find the correct paragraph reference for you in So these would be new supporting text paragraphs, so they wouldn't have a reference in the current plan. The first would read, all new developments and proposals for change of use within SEAs must demonstrate that the proposed design, transport implications and amenity impacts will not cause harm to the strategic function or day-to-day operations of the SEA, both during construction and once operational. And then the next paragraph would be, the North Telford Strategic Employment Area contains MOD Donington, which is strategic logistics hub for the armed forces. Therefore, any development within the vicinity of the base needs to ensure it does not negatively impact military operations. So that would be the proposed mods, and I think we're just seeking to provide extra clarity and to not undermine the purpose of the SEAs as we've laid out in the policy.
Sorry, before I come back to your statement, I think that just sticking with this list, actually, that you're also proposing the deletion of the word gender there, I think, in EC 1D, is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
And what was the thinking there?
Again, for clarity, to be effective.
Okay. Just give me a minute.
Sorry, Madam, just chatting to the council team.
Yeah.
The first one of those two proposed mods,
Yes.
I just wonder whether on reflection, actually, because of what it's saying, it is policy rather than supporting text. And I think we'll just sort of consider that, and maybe, I think the wording is absolutely fine, it's clear what it's doing, but just query whether actually what that is intending to be policy rather than explanation of the policy.
Okay, thanks, that'd be helpful.
And so and I think the logical place to slot it in would be as another letter in part 1, but we'll just reflect on that with the team, if that's okay.
Yes, that would be helpful, thank you. And if you could, just on that one, if you could just tell us the justification for that particular proposed modification.
Yeah, it's again for the effectiveness of the policy. I believe it came as a result of consultation.
Thank you. Made a note here, and perhaps you can assist me just whether I've understood this correctly or not. I've made a note here that you have also proposed, and this will be from your matter statement, removing the word employment from paragraph 811, which I don't think we've touched on yet. Oh, well, that is covered by that one. No, that one. Oh, yes, yes. Yes, sorry, we have covered that one. Apologies. And then there was also a reference I'd noted to amending paragraph 8.9 to make clear that only Class EG uses fall within the definition of employment uses. And again, that comes back to the conversation we've been having in previous sessions. Am I right? Is that something that has been proposed?
Yeah, we haven't actually we've suggested in the MIQ
Yes.
response
Yes.
we make such a modification.
Indeed, indeed.
We haven't actually put in the response to the MIQ
What that would be.
what that wording would
Indeed.
be. So, yes,
Yes.
in principle, but we haven't given you wording yet.
Yes, and if you could just for clarity, explain why the council is proposing that from a soundness point of view.
Yeah, it's an effectiveness point because what we're seeking to support is your classic employment uses, and
Yeah.
I guess well-trodden ground at this examination. The scope of E is now quite broad, and
Indeed.
you need to be specific within Class E as to what you are considering as employment uses.
Yep. Okay. All right. So that's helpful. Thanks. So there's a few points there for the list. If I could just turn to the other side, I note Mr. Burrow's got his nameplate up, and I did also want to ask Mr. Benham, because again this was a point that had been raised. But if I start with Mr. Burrow, what's your perspective?
Thank you. And for the purpose of the recording, Michael Burrow from Savills representing Barrett Redrow. So the point we'd like to make is to agree the proposed amendment to paragraph 8.11 to remove the word employment would be necessary in order to be effective. The rationale for that is policy EC 1.1D talks about other uses outside of the identified economic activities, and as drafted, paragraph 8.11 talks about employment uses, so it's more restrictive than the policy wording. And why are we interested in this? It's not a carte blanche idea to bring in all alternative uses in. This is focused on ancillary uses within employment areas that might generally be found, such as staff canteens, staff nurseries for staff children, those sorts of activities which are limited to users of the employment areas, and removing the word employment takes away a discussion in the future on whether a nursery for children from staff within the employment area is an employment use. So removing the word employment, I think, is necessary to make the policy effective.
Thanks. So just to clarify, you are effectively supporting the council's suggested modification there by removing that word?
That's correct, yes.
Right, and you've just elaborated on why you think that's necessary for soundness.
Correct.
Anything to add from the council on that?
Nothing to add.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Benham, again, if I could turn to you, because again, this was a point I think that had been raised with regard to, I'm assuming it, from the Telford Trustees' perspective, it's again about that control in relation to town centre uses versus outside of town centre locations. Are the changes that you've heard described there, or what's your response to those in relation to the soundness concerns you had raised?
So I'm looking at the response to the MIQs from the council, and what is set out in there is helpful. I think we would ask that it goes a step further, though, and I'm not seeing reference within the subtext to that there will actually be conditions imposed on Class E uses to keep them as the sort of whatever it is that the council grant at that point in time. Sounds as though it would likely be e.g. a condition to restrict it to that specific use, to restrict movement within Class E more generally. So in the MIQ's response, it seems as though the council is aligned with us on that point, that they are trying to restrict uses to the specific traditional employment uses, if we call it that. But it then doesn't translate into the subtext or the policy that is how they will actually control it.
Thank you. So, and again, this is something we've touched on in previous sessions. For clarity for plan users and therefore for effectiveness, I suppose my question for council is, would it be helpful in supporting text to make reference to the mechanism that would be used in order to achieve that objective that's in the policy?
Well, we've obviously done it elsewhere, as we've just looked at, so it would be sensible to have a consistent approach throughout the plan to such issues. So, yeah, we're happy to consider that and give thought to where and what wording would be appropriate.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, just confirming on that. Mr. Humphries, you said that the suggested new paragraph that you had proposed after 8.1.11, you're going to have a look at that because you think that might be policy wording. It should go into policy. Just looking at the wording of 8.1.11, particularly the first part of it, that might also appear to be policy. And I just wonder whether in looking at the new wording for that paragraph that you was going to go in after 8.1.11, that you might now be looking for to go into policy, whether you just might need to have regard to that as well, existing word in 8.1.11, whether the first part of that particular could be regarded as policy rather than supporting text.
multiple versions of the plan. Let me just check.
I'm looking at the
You're,
publication.
you're looking at the publication 8.11.
Indeed, yes.
Yeah, we're happy to, we'll do a general check and see what should be supporting text and what should be policy. Yes, thank you for flagging that, Inspector.
Thank you. And then moving on to question 70. Now, the Council's actually already talked us through its proposed modification in response to this. So this question relates to soundness around protection of military-related facilities. Well, A and B, they're two sort of slightly separate things, but they're two separate effectiveness points. And you've talked us through two modifications that I think I'm right in saying, yes, so that's the one 72 that we've talked about already, that part in paragraph 811, and then 73. So these are references in CD07. The one that, apologies for the names, William, whose surname I can't read from here because I have my glasses. Mr. Bishop, thank you, apologies. You talked us through that one, didn't you, in terms of the North Telford Strategic Employment Area and MOD Donington. Can I check, is that the most up-to-date modification that is being proposed, or is there any further change suggested to that?
I think the most up-to-date position is the one we've laid out in our MIQ response, which includes parts that aren't included in the submission. For
Right. So, could you just quickly talk me through that again, then, please, and the rationale there?
So the rationale again goes to clarity, and we're proposing the introduction of the introduction of a point C, which would be development proposals for sui generis uses associated with operational defence and security at MOD Donington will be supported.
Yep, I can see that. Okay, thank you. Are there any? Yes, Mr. Cramphorn.
Thank you. Joseph Cramphorn, Savills, on behalf of Defence Infrastructure Organisation. So I think, welcome the modifications that the Council has proposed in terms of them being taken forward to remedy the effectiveness and soundness points that were raised in representations. They weren't actually my representations, they're my colleague, Mrs. McCabe, and she was actually down to attend this session, but basically said to pass on the point of the modifications being welcomed as a remedy in the soundness points that she'd raised in Regulation 19 representations.
That's helpful, thank you. Okay. So yes, obviously add those to the list, thank you. Now, question 71. We'd raised a question around, so I suppose this comes from an clarity and therefore effectiveness point. We've got policy EC1, employment development in the urban area and SEAs. We've got policy EC2, economic development in the urban area. And then supporting text, some of which we've just been talking about, that sits under those two policies. Some of which appears to relate to one of the policies and some of which relates to the other, and perhaps some of which relates to both. I have to say, when I was reading through it, I was getting a bit confused, and that might perhaps be partly where some of the other questions have come. And an example of that is, for example, paragraph 8.12, which talks about the marketing requirements, which I think I'm right, well, I interpret as being relevant to policy EC2 and not to policy EC1, but could potentially be misinterpreted in that regard. So, I mean, I think we had a soundness concern there, really, around the clarity and therefore effectiveness, and would like to ask the council to look at the sequence of the two policies and their associated supporting text, just to kind of disentangle that. Does that make sense?
That makes complete sense, and we can do that.
Thank you. And then on that marketing period, which is relevant to the requirements of EC2, the council has suggested a modification there to read minimum period of 12 months. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And could you just explain why you think that is necessary for soundness?
I think it just provides the clarity about our expectations around that, and we felt it was a reasonable time period to apply to it. So, and it's about that kind of protection of existing employment uses to make sure that if they are genuinely not required or there's no takers for the land, we've done as much as we can to ensure that we are maintaining that as an employment use in the first instance.
Yep. So the addition of the word apologies, because at the moment it actually doesn't specify a period at all, does it? Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, yeah. So it's the addition of the time period for clarity and effectiveness. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Yep. Okay, thank you. I think that might have been something that Mr. Burrow you had raised. Is that correct?
Thank you. It is something which we raised. Because there wasn't originally as submitted a period identified, and then confusingly in the submission version, the proposed use of a maximum period of 12 months we thought wouldn't be effective because it gives the opportunity for someone to market for a month and be acceptable. So on a effectiveness points, we were seeking a minimum timescale requirement, which the council has now clarified.
Okay, thank you. Not anything to add? No, okay. Mr. Warden's just flagged to me that there was an additional one, additional modification that's sitting in in CD7, my mind's gone blank, the CD7, thank you. So this is the one numbered 76, again at paragraph 812. You're, I think, suggesting the insertion of wording at a range of 10 years and, is that right? And could you clarify?
Yeah, that's correct. A range of 10 years and across a range of agents' websites is the existing text.
And the rationale there again is presumably around clarity and effectiveness.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. That's everything we had on EC1 and EC2. I can't see any nameplates up, so I'm going to move on to EC3, employment in the rural area. Yeah, no, Mr. Warden's just quite rightly reminded me to ask the council again, just to assist us in this process by, by just making sure that each time we go through a policy, if there are indeed modifications that have been made either originally or subsequently, in case we are missing them, because we're tracking across a few documents. So if between us we can try and make sure we've got them all covered, that would be most helpful. Thank you, Mr. Warden, for that reminder. So, yes, policy EC3, employment in the rural area. So question 73, there are a few points on this. I'll just go through the questions and there may be a few other points that emerge. The first question was around clarity about whether the policy, and this is a point that it was a point of soundness raised in representations, around whether this policy applies to land allocated as sustainable communities. As we know from policy HO2, obviously, of course, this is something that you're going to be looking at again, but I suppose this may come up in a number of instances. There is, as things stand, I think I'm right in saying, a sort of general reference to other relevant policies in the plan also applying to the sustainable communities, which sort of begs the question which ones are relevant, and therefore that is it necessary, again, for effectiveness, for the plan to make clear in areas where there could be some ambiguity like this one, whether this is a policy that would apply in addition to policy HO2 or would not apply?
So by virtue of them being allocated as sustainable communities, our position is that they cease to be in the rural area, so they are then, the boundary gets redrawn and they become part of the urban area. And so when you look at the policies map, that's the boundary that then exists. We can do, I think it's probably not a policy EC3 point, it's probably for elsewhere in the plan, but we can just, we'll do a check to just make sure that the language elsewhere in relation to the SCs is clear, that, as to where they sit in the, within the settlement hierarchy, or the relevant rural urban designation of the plan.
I think that would be helpful for clarity and avoidance of doubt. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Before I come on to the next few questions, we noted that the title of this policy is Employment in the Rural Area. as opposed to economic development or business uses or whatever it might be. Could the council just explain what it's trying to achieve through this policy, and indeed reflect on whether that title for the policy is the most helpful title? Thank you.
Yeah, in terms of the title of the policy, it's a carryover from the adopted local plan, so it's consistent there. We've broadened the scope of the policy to reflect the kind of broader nature of employment and economic uses within the rural area. I think it's probably worth pointing out we've got other policies that cover things like local services within the rural area, community facilities, and other types of, I suppose, in very broad terms, economic activity in that sense. So really the policy was to make the distinction between urban employment within the urban area and employment uses within the rural area, to provide that kind of clarity, if you like. And that's worked well within the adopted plan, so we were kind of taking that approach forward, if you like.
Just sticking with that word employment in the title, is it, I mean, you just said employment uses there. I mean, that could be interpreted in a number of different ways. So one interpretation could be employment uses, which would be defined in the plan quite narrowly. It could be taken to mean jobs, I guess. But I suppose there are other aspects of the local economy more generally, I suppose, that the policy addresses. So if I maybe just park that point for a minute in terms of that word. Obviously, I hear what you're saying about it being in the existing plan, but again, of course, we are examining this plan. And I'll just sort of just hone in on the next few questions, and then we might just come back to that. Yeah. So question 74 is, and this emerges from representations around soundness in terms of consistency with national policy, and is something that we thought also, we wanted to raise in terms of a soundness question. So is the policy approach consistent with national policy on supporting a prosperous rural economy, including in relation to agriculture and other land-based rural businesses? And I suppose the point here is that what national policy is looking for there arguably is broader than, say, a narrowly defined employment uses, if that is what the word employment is referring to. So in that regard, I should point out that word employment, it's in the title, but it's also the first word of part 1 of the policy, which talks about employment development in the rural area should be directed to. So if I could come back to you again, I suppose, just on that point, is the policy, is that intended to mean just employment uses as defined elsewhere in the plan, or is it broader? And in that regard, is there a consistency question there in terms of what the framework is looking for around support more broadly for a prosperous rural economy, including in relation to agriculture and other land-based rural businesses?
Thank you, ma'am. I think you're probably right in terms of that economic development point and the definition of employment in the plan itself and in the NPPF. I think we probably need to reflect on that in terms of the title of the policy and how that kind of tracks through in terms of the NPPF and being consistent with the NPPF. So happy to have a look at that.
That would be helpful, thanks. I mean, it's of course for yourselves to consider what that wording might look like, but it occurred to me, for example, that replacing the first word of the policy, the word employment, with something like business-related development, for example, might be a way to achieve that, but obviously we'll leave that thought with you. Okay, thank you. So that's an action for the list. Similarly, in that regard, whether, again, to assist plan users, whether the sort of introductory supporting paragraph 816 might then also helpfully be revisited. I mean, it does sort of say not solely the traditional use class B employment, which, given things have moved on, may or may not be the most helpful wording anyway. But again, perhaps just to be a bit clearer, and whether actually reflecting some of the wording from the framework may be helpful there for clarity.
Yeah, and I think there's then a consistency point between that supporting text and the policy to look at.
Indeed. Okay, thanks. So wrap that up into one action. That's great. Thanks for that. And then another question which relates to consistency with national policy. So framework paragraph 187B asks plans as well as decisions to recognise the economic benefits of the best and most versatile agricultural land. Now, I note the Council's response on this. You've suggested adding a cross-reference to relevant plan policy that addresses that. But just for clarity, which policy are you pointing us to there? I had a bit of a look and I couldn't immediately find what it was you were referring to. Or maybe to assist, the only reference I could find was policy ML3, which is actually a very narrow policy in relation to minerals development.
Yeah, the reference in the MIQ response is the reference that the MIQ response suggests is made is to policy EC3, because what EC3 is seeking to do is direct development in the rural area to previously developed land in essence, or brownfield sites, through criteria 1. And so by doing so, it seeks to prevent or seeks to focus development in those areas and therefore not on agricultural land, because obviously there would be a distinction there, but it's right, so it's not a freestanding, it's not put in the language of BMV, but the intention is that by focusing on the types of sites listed in that policy, that is then focusing development away from the areas where you would find best and most versatile land.
Okay. Yes.
Sorry, following the jumping off point, I guess, is the concern that for consistency with the framework, there needs to be something that's more specific by reference to.
Well, of course, the framework, so if we just look at what the framework says, I mean, I suppose I was just slightly confused there because we're talking about policy EC3 and the reference is then back to the same policy, and it seemed to me to be suggesting a cross-reference to a reference elsewhere in the plan, but I may have misunderstood that, so fair enough. But in any event, thinking about, so, framework paragraph, what was it now, 107, thank you, 187. So 187 says, bearing in mind we're obviously talking here about economy and economic development specifically, planning policies and decisions should contribute to and enhance natural and local environment by B, recognising intrinsic, etc., including the economic and other benefits of BMV. So it was whether. And obviously, so it's really about whether the plan is sufficiently consistent with national policy in terms of ensuring that that consideration is taken into account and weighed in the balance should development come forward? That's the question. So it's specifically around economic benefits of BMV.
Yeah, we can. I think it's a good point in terms of just clarifying the policy and making sure we're consistent with national policy, so we can go in, have a look at that. I think in terms of that broader benefit of BMV land, we can have a look at other policies that we could point to as well, potentially.
Yes, I mean, I don't think the action necessarily needs to go broader than what we're talking about here. I mean, I know there is a reference in relation to minerals, which we'll come onto on another day, but that's a very narrow reference. But I think really it was just in this context.
We can check. I think the strategy is in essence to provide a reasonably high degree of protection for the rural areas.
Of course,
therefore
of course.
Is whether we'll look at whether there's benefit to be derived from, for consistency with the framework, something more specific that highlights the role that BMV and agricultural land plays within.
Yes, with regard to what the framework is asking for, and that could potentially be within supporting text. Okay, thank you. Then question 75, I understand you have agreed some wording there, I think, with Harper Adams University, is that right? Or at least you have proposed some wording?
Yeah, we've proposed some wording in our MIQ response, yes.
Okay, so could you just quickly talk me through that and explain the rationale from a soundness point of view, please?
Yes, so the proposed wording would be appropriate development as identified in policy EC3 within the campus will be supported. And the reason for that was the university is a very, very important asset within the borough, and we wouldn't want to overly restrict their ability to continue doing the great work that they do.
So from a soundness point of view, the rationale is?
Just being clear and effective in terms of supporting that, the development of the university, but within its existing campus. I think just to point out a kind of a cross-linkage with the Edgemond neighbourhood plan. There's very... Sorry,
the cross-linkage with what? Sorry, I misheard.
So the Edgemond neighbourhood plan.
Oh, right, yeah.
So it's very much about kind of one of the concerns with the community was the coalescence of the risk of coalescence between the university and Edgemond. So that's hence the wording we've proposed.
Yeah, I think to put it in the classic soundness language, it ensures that it's positively prepared because it's protecting an important asset within the borough, and for similar reasons is therefore justified. There is an evidence base and there's something there to protect, and it should be. And then on top of that, that protection therefore needs to be effective.
Thank you. Just to clarify, that suggested modification is in the policy, is that right? Or is it in the supporting text?
Yeah, that would be supporting text.
Supporting text, okay. Okay, thanks. Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, supportive wording kind of means supporting text wording. Okay. Thank you. Unless there's anything else which I can't see on that policy, that moves us on to EC4 and the last three questions on this issue. So EC4 relates to waste management facilities. Now, I note there are some modifications proposed here. I think the best place to start, therefore, is Council to clarify, if you could please, which is the most up-to-date set of modifications that we need to be looking at. So is it those in CD7, or is there anything else additional to that proposed in your statement, or different from that?
The council's most up-to-date position is in the CD7 document.
Okay, all right, thank you. So we'll come to those in turn. So question 76. The question is around effectiveness of the wording. In safeguarding existing strategic recycling facilities in the borough, as recommended in the Council's evidence document. So that's the waste study, the 2024 update, WM02. So that document identifies strategic, as I said, strategic recycling facilities that serve both the borough and a much wider area, and it does recommend that they should be safeguarded. The policy, as we read it, requires an applicant to demonstrate. So should an application come forward on one of those strategic recycling sites that contain a strategic recycling facility, I think as we read it at the moment, the policy requires an applicant to demonstrate the relevant waste management capacity is not required, and then supporting text then makes reference to a 12-month marketing for an alternative waste use. So our question there is that policy approach and that mechanism effective in safeguarding those sites which have been identified in evidence as strategic recycling facilities? Is there still a risk that, well, yeah, that's the question, really. How would the council respond to that?
Yeah, I think, thank you, ma'am. Similar to the marketing period for employment uses, I think we were looking to apply what would be a reasonable marketing period that would help protect those uses. We'd like to see clear evidence that that site has been marketed for those uses, and they've made efforts to do that rather than it just being tucked away on a website somewhere. So we will be challenging that in terms of any change of use application. But I think it's also worth just recognising that in terms of waste management facilities, sometimes in the business of waste management that can be market driven. So we're just trying to reflect on that. So providing that protection, but also recognising that there may be instances where other facilities come online, so that facility may no longer be required, that can provide that similar type of capacity.
You just look at how the 1B of the policy is applications for a change of use from waste management to other uses will need to demonstrate that the relevant waste capacity is no longer required. So in terms of safeguarding the existing facilities, if somebody was wanting to do something with any of them that was not waste, the onus would be on them to demonstrate that there is no longer a requirement for them. So the starting point is there is a requirement for them and they're needed, which is obviously therefore consistent with the evidence base. And if any given applicant is wanting to do something different, well, that's then on them to satisfy us that capacity is just no longer needed.
Okay. I mean, bearing in mind, so it's an effectiveness point. It's also actually a consistency with national policy point. So thinking about national planning policy for waste, and bearing in mind the strategic role of the particular facilities in question, I think it's 2 facilities, in that marketing exercise that's been described, how would the strategic role of the facility and the views of the waste management authorities that rely on it, bearing in mind it's serving a need wider than the council, how would those views be taken into account? Is the plan clear enough in that regard that such views need to be taken into account, and is it clear that they would have to be? So those are strategic facilities that the need for which extends beyond Telford and Wrekin. So how, in such a marketing exercise, would those effectively cross-border impact be taken into account?
I think this is something we need to look at, because I think it's not necessarily just a marketing point, because there might be somebody who says, well, we don't want to buy it, but we need it in the system because it does X, Y, and Z.
Exactly.
So I think it's a supporting text point and greater clarity. The starting point is the policy itself requires you to demonstrate that the waste capacity is no longer required.
Yep.
And so that's clearly not simply a marketing related. It's the capacity required.
Yep.
So we can relook at the supporting text to give some, and I think it's not necessarily an exhaustive list. It's this is the type of evidence which will be required to demonstrate that the capacity is no longer required.
Yes, and in so doing, would it be more effective, or would it be necessary for effectiveness and consistency with national policy to make clear that there are different categories of waste site that serve different needs, some of which are strategic?
Yeah, we can think about all of that, and I don't know whether reference needs to be made to particular stakeholders who might need to have been consulted on. You know, that we'll relook at that and think about the breadth of the type of evidence that needs to be. But I think the way to do it as well is, you know, the ultimate test remains: have you sufficiently demonstrated that it's no longer required? And we can provide a pathway to that, but in a non-exhaustive fashion.
Yes. And presumably in the case of a strategic site, I mean, that would suggest that, well, yes, I take your point, but it would suggest that there might need to be demonstrate that no alternative provision will be required. Yes, and sorry, just for clarity, the point in relation to national planning policy for waste, paragraph 8, was the point about not prejudicing the implementation of the waste hierarchy. But thanks, that's a helpful action. And then final two questions, which I think are ones where you have responded with proposed modifications, either as existing already in CD7 or one additional one. So on question 77, is the requirement to create new employment opportunities in Part 1C justified and proportionate? I think your response, you've accepted it may not be. Is that right? And you've recognised the need to clarify that?
Yes, I think the clarity needs to be around if it's a new waste facility. Clearly, you'd expect it'd be reasonable to expect there to be some kind of job creation attached to that, and that's a benefit to the community. So understanding that's helpful. If it's an existing facility, there could conceivably be instances where you're expanding parking areas, or you're making changes that require applications that don't have any additional job creation attached to that. So I think that was the clarity point we were looking for.
Yes, and I suppose in what you've just said, you've acknowledged the benefit of new employment, but it's really that point about whether that, as currently phrased, 1C suggests it's a requirement, and is that justified and proportionate? So it's really looking at that wording, perhaps, is it? Yeah,
and just creating that distinction between new
Yes, that distinction, yes, yes,
and
yes,
then,
yes, yes.
then tracking through the changes.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And even in the case, yes, yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. Okay, that's helpful, thank you. And finally, question 78. Effectiveness of the policy in protecting existing waste management facilities, including wastewater treatment facilities, from the impact of nearby development. I understand from your response that the modifications which are in CD7, numbers 77 and 78, are ones that have been agreed with the Environment Agency because this was a point they had raised. Is that right? Correct understanding?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And just for completeness, if you could just explain why, in the Council's view, those are necessary for soundness.
It would be effectiveness again. We think to just make very, very clear what would be expected within the policy.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, so that brings us to the end of all our questions. I can't see any more signs up. Anything else from the Council that you would like to add in relation to this matter and issue, or this issue?
So I was just checking one of the points I've noted. I think we're content with where we've got to on that.
All right. Okay, in which case that brings this session to a close. And that's the end of this matter 6, issue 2. Thank you. Oh, we were going to have a admin meeting, yeah.
Do we need just a quick catch up on those action points? We picked them up from yesterday, so we don't need to go back over that.
No, I think we've been keeping a running note of the ones from this morning. I'm happy to just have 5 minutes if you want to go through those with those.
Useful, just running through those just for this morning's one, just before we finish.
Makes sense whilst we're here and we've got no time pressures.
Okay. So, just to the other participants, we're just going to run, the session has ended now, but we're just going to run through those action points, make sure that they've all been captured. You're welcome to stay and observe.